Okay, so last time we left off, I had explained how I was a police officer, and it was through being a police officer that I was able to take some drug classes, and I was able to figure out about psychedelics. And as far as the government's concerned, well, the government calls them hallucinogens. That's the first thing, and that's kind of important, because it just kind of shows the government's limited understanding of a lot of these things. I had mentioned how my DRE book doesn't even have DMT in it at all, and it also doesn't have ayahuasca in it. I guess it's an American-based thing, the fact that here in the United States, ayahuasca is not a thing being passed around. So one of the things that that we were able to determine is basically these hallucinogens, for the most part, are pretty safe. They're pretty safe for your body, and some might argue they're not safe for your psychological state or something like that. But then, you get on YouTube and you actually do some research on it and everything. You listen to somebody like Jordan Peterson, and, they'd explain that there doesn't seem to be a lot of there doesn't seem to be a lot of stories of people having major problems on psychedelics. Bad trips. It seems like a bad trip. There is no such thing as a bad. This is what I believe. There's no such thing as a bad trip. There's only challenging trips. Anybody that did seem to have any major problems with psychedelics had some sort of mental predisposition, some sort of medical condition already, like schizophrenia or, something like that, some sort of major problem that should have been something that was considered before having taken psychedelics. So they're so safe, the psychedelics, as far as your body's concerned, that I actually have a friend who has a major heart problem, and when they take the psychedelics don't really seem to affect their heart. Well, there was one time, I guess, where they stated that their heart did feel a little funny, but ultimately everything worked out and they're fine. So psychedelics, what they're supposed to do, body-wise, is they are supposed to raise your temperature and your blood pressure. They're also supposed to increase your pulse rate. So there's a little bit of an effect on your body. The effect is very, very minimal, especially when you compare it to other drugs. Something like narcotics, where they they end up doing some major damage to your body. Something like meth. Meth can really screw up your body. There's other drugs that will start eating away at your skin and stuff like that, and give you major wounds. And so as far as hallucinogens go, a lot of the stuff, I'm looking at the DRE. They're called general indicators. They're just the clues that determine whether or not, or that the police officers use in order to determine which drug someone's on. And so these general indicators for the hallucinogens, some of them are like a dazed appearance. Yeah, that makes sense. Difficulty with speech, hallucinations, obviously. Paranoia. They say nausea, and I went over this last time in the last episode. Is nausea. It's the mushrooms taste nasty. If you're doing mushrooms, they taste nasty, and really I think the nausea comes from from the fact that you're eating these nasty mushrooms. But anyways, they talk about, sometimes they add in a general indicator like paranoia, which is really interesting, because I've certainly never been paranoid on mushrooms. I've heard of people being paranoid on stuff like MDMA, which is interesting, which isn't, see, the the real world, the real world, the majority of people that are actually just out and about that aren't part of the government or police officers, they don't really consider MDMA to be in the same vein of psychedelic as say mushrooms or DMT or ayahuasca. You know, there's a pretty big difference. So the paranoia thing, that's kind of a weird one that's in there. They also say perspiring. Now, I've never perspired on mushrooms, and so I wonder if that's, it's because I stay in my house or something like that, and the temperature's always regulated. I don't know. I'm not for sure about that one. Poor perception of time and distance. Now that's something we can get way into. I'm gonna start explaining my first two trips here. We're gonna get into my first two trips. Perception and time are huge major indicators. I guess they're effects definitely that I feel sometimes to an incredible extreme, especially when considering time. So anyways, let's get into I'm going to explain my first few trips. And I know at the end of the last video I kind of briefly went over my first trip, but there's a lot more to it, I guess. Or I also, one of the things with these podcasts, and the reason I'm kind of going in chronological order of what happened, despite me wanting to talk about a myriad of subjects with these psychedelics and these things I've seen and what they all mean, and trying to tie the whole process into Christianity and conservatism as well. The thing is, I got to go in chronological order because I think it lays a good foundation for the fact that my trips were very much archetypical. They're like almost perfectly archetypical in some ways. Just the themes that they followed. If you want to follow the hero's journey, I think my basically my trips, that's the order that they followed, is basically the same as the hero's journey. Or you could say they also follow the shamanic tradition or something like that. If you listen to Jordan Peterson, and you kind of get his ideas on those things, it's the parallels are just absolutely incredible. So I talked to my girlfriend, right? So here's the story of the first trip. I got a hold of my girlfriend. She wasn't my girlfriend at the time, really. I guess you can say we were dating at the time or something like that. But I knew she had smoked weed, and originally I had asked her if she could get a hold of salvia, and she was unable to get a hold of salvia, but she did have a friend who was able to get a hold of mushrooms. So that friend ended up sending us mushrooms, and what happened is they were sent to us in capsules, ground up in capsules, and the capsules had broken open in the baggie during transportation. So what ended up happening is we ended up losing a lot of the mushrooms, and basically we had just enough for just me to take, and it must have only been about 1.5 grams. So my first trip was probably, I'd say it was 1.5 grams. And I had, leading up to that, between the class, the drug class, deciding to take the psilocybin, and then leading up to us actually getting them, I did a lot of studying. I listened to a lot of Paul Stamets' stuff. I listened to a little bit of Joe Rogan's stuff, although I didn't understand a lot of it at the time. I mostly listened to his stuff as far as it related to the medical side of taking psilocybin, the fact that it it's supposed to activate neurogenesis and stuff like that, the fact that I did hear Jordan Peterson's speeches on the John Hopkins studies, but I didn't go too far into that. I just heard the part, Jordan Peterson, there's a few of his talks where he goes over the John Hopkins studies, but he goes over them very, very briefly, and he just gives the results, basically. He just says, basically, the people took psilocybin, right, they had a mystical experience, and then it was considered one of the greatest experiences of their lives. So that's what I knew about it. So I had heard about set and setting. That was one thing, and that's one thing that I took into my first trip and has been very vital ever since. Set and setting, that's actually really, really important, because later on I do have a trip. Well, I guess I didn't have a trip. I got high on mushrooms without having a trip. Very high, actually. I think it was like 5 gram heroic dose. I was, hoping it was going to be a good trip, and then I ended up not having any mystical experience at all, which was insane. So that kind of really showed me the importance of the set and setting. But as far as my first trip is concerned, I knew set and setting was important. So what I did was I cleaned out my living room, and I got some candles, and I put them on the table in the living room, and I lit them, and I decided I also put some candles in my bedroom. I put the candles on the nightstands because I knew I'd want to go lay down. I still didn't know that you were supposed to actually close your eyes and just like listen to music for the entire trip. I didn't know that part yet. Basically, what I had decided I wanted to do is I wanted to watch a movie. I decided I wanted to watch heavy metal. If anybody was to take a low dose of psilocybin and watch a movie, heavy metal, you can't go wrong there. The colors and the music are very good. Very good, of course. It's such a creative little movie, and the stories are interesting, to say the least. So, anyways, so I decided to play heavy metal, and I took the psilocybin as a tea, right? Since it was in powder form, we were like, okay, well, the best way to do this is going to be to put it in a tea. So I put it in a tea, and I probably did take a second to drink it. I probably didn't drink it right away. And then the about the time I remember now, the time when I started noticing a difference is when the spaceship shows up over like the government building, and the guy turns out to be a robot, and they suck him up into the spaceship, and they accidentally suck up the secretary too, the girl secretary, and there's the robot that's voiced by like John Candy or something like that. That's the moment where I started noticing kind of a turn up, and they play the heavy metal music there, which is really good. Or is the scene before that? The scene before that, I think, is the World War II pilot scene, and that's when I laughed. I don't know if this happens for everybody, but it seems to happen for everybody that I've seen take their first trip. Is you seem to laugh that first time. There's a certain point where you laugh, and just after you laugh is the time when you start tripping. So I think I laughed during the World War II scene, and I think it was just after that. That's the next scene, is where the alien ship shows up, and I think that's where I first started kind of noticing a difference in the colors and the sounds, and just everything seemed turned up just a little bit. Since it was such a low dose, I didn't have any. Well, first of all, I didn't close my eyes. Once again, I didn't realize that's what you were supposed to do. So I didn't have any colors, visuals, or anything like that. Here's an interesting thing to talk about, and I think it's something a lot of people confuse, especially if you talk to the older generation, the Ronald Reagan conservatives. If you talk to them about mushrooms, they assume that they're just like any other drug that you take recreationally, where they make you feel good. Now, it's possible I could say that maybe on those first 2 trips, they might have... I don't know if they made me feel better, to tell you the truth. I personally, especially now, and especially when I take heroic doses, the mushrooms do not make me feel better. It's kind of like you get the feeling like you've been like working all day, like you just worked like a 10-hour shift, your feet are hurting and everything, you go and you lay down on your bed. That's kind of the feeling that it gives you. It's more of an ache. It's not a pleasant feeling necessarily. You don't get a sense of euphoria, not like we would on something like heroin. Once again, I haven't taken these drugs, but I understand the basics of them, having talked to several people, like as a police officer and everything. The basics, I should say. But anyways, you don't get a sense of euphoria on hallucinogens, or at least not on mushrooms. I haven't taken the others, but it doesn't seem like anybody, like when they do a DMT trip, and then I've taken psilocybin to the point where I've had basically the same experience as a DMT trip. I've gotten to that place. And when it happens and you come back, your body does not feel good. Because it's like your spirit reconnecting to your body, and you're trying to reintegrate and figure out how to work the controls again. And this is a little metaphoric, but maybe it's real in the same vein. But these are things that I'll want to talk about a little bit more in depth as we go on. I need to keep this chronological. I gotta get back to the story here. So I'm watching heavy metal, and at one point in time I had to get up and go pee, and that's usually in all my trips. That's the point where I actually kind of change, like something changes usually when I got to get up and go pee. So I had to get up and go pee, and I decided to turn off the. My girlfriend's with me, by the way. I had her as my trip sitter. She's usually my trip sitter. I have tripped alone, and it usually works out just fine, but it seems to be better when she's there. But anyways, so we turn off the movie a little bit early, a little bit before it ends. I had seen the movie and I knew where it was going, and I kind of felt bored by the last story with the girl where she's flying the pterodactyl around and everything like that. And as it's getting kind of closer to the end, I just kind of felt like I needed to go lay down. So we got up, went into the bedroom to lay down. Now, I think we turned on some normal music, just some, it might have been some classic rock or something like that. Some real light, like maybe Eagles classic rock type stuff. And we're laying down in the bed. And so I had mentioned I had the candles lit, and this was the interesting part, and this is kind of the first set of me getting a little bit more hooked, because really just watching the movie, all it was enhanced was colors, but and maybe a little of the sound. But so I'm sitting there on the bed here, and I'm looking up the ceiling. The candle is lit, and it's kind of changing the color of the room. I've got blue walls. The candle, I think, was pink, and it was in a holder with like designs on the side, and it was causing a shadow to be cast up on the wall that was, to me, looked like the form of like a dragon's head. Like its neck was coming out from like where the candle was about, and then its head was up on the ceiling. And so I have this is actually kind of integral right here to the majority of my trips. My ceiling is a popcorn ceiling, not like a 70s style popcorn. It's more like a modern day popcorn style ceiling. And in that ceiling, in the popcorn, is like sparkles. They're like I guess glitter, like large chunks of glitter are embedded into the popcorn. So if I have the right lighting going, I can actually look up and I can see like those sparkles. When I'm tripping, I see a lot more of them. They become more vibrant. And a lot of the times they'll be changing colors, they'll be flashing, depending on how like the like the candles flickering or something like that. When I'm in my, I now have a trip room. When I'm in my trip room, I have LED lights that play, and I have my computer that also has LEDs on it, and they quite often will mess around with those little sparkles to create interesting effects. So anyway, so on this one, on my first trip, I'm laying in bed and I'm holding the girl. The girl's like, I think she's laying on my chest. I think I got my arm around her, and I'm looking up at this dragon-shaped shadow on the ceiling, and I'm looking up at the popcorn ceiling, and I'm looking up at the sparkles and everything. And right there, kind of, this is where my peak was, I'm pretty sure. The ceiling seemed to kind of disappear. It's not like it completely disappeared, but it's almost like it just kind of pushed back a little bit further, and it looked like the dragon was flying through like space, and like a very, very like just beautiful, like, because the stars were the sparkles and they were very, very colorful, and the dragon's head was just kind of waving up and down. It wasn't anything extreme. This is kind of I'm kind of like taking out the way that I felt as well, and merging it into the story here. Is like, this is kind of what I felt like I was seeing. It wasn't like a real vision or anything like that, which I'll get into as we go in. Obviously, some of my other trips I have like major visions, but so in this one, I was just seeing kind of like the heavens opening up or something like that. Very it's interesting, like I said about the whole archetype. It's very interesting to consider this as the starting point. It's almost like this is the call to adventure. It's like I'm in my normal world. I'm a police officer. I have my concepts of the world, and then all of a sudden, the concept of the world is kind of tweaked just a little, just enough for me to question it and say, oh, okay, maybe I need to investigate further out in this direction here. So I think that was pretty much the majority of the first trip. I don't think anything else really happened. Oh, I did feel a presence in the room, and that was interesting. Now, I believe I had felt presence before, but this was a pretty, like, hindsight now looking back at it, it wasn't a very strong presence, but at the time I probably felt like it was a pretty strong presence, like it was a pretty noticeable feeling. It was very friendly, very kind. This is hard, these things are hard to describe right here. Anybody that hasn't taken psychedelics or hasn't actually, had an experience like this, it's so hard to describe the fact that you can feel the fact that there's something else in the room that isn't actually in the room. So, like I said, realistically, it was a very, very light feeling, especially in comparison to how I have sometimes now with some of my trips. So, this and this feeling kind of went along with some of the Native American things that I was gonna try to get out of taking the psilocybin mushrooms. So I am Native American. I mentioned this in the last podcast. I actually did an ancestry DNA test, and I turned out to be a lot more Native American than I thought. And my tribe was from like Juarez, Mexico type area. Well, it's funny, they were there. They originally like an offshoot of like the Aztec Empire, and as the Aztec Empire fell after the Spaniards came, my tribe navigated their way north and then eventually navigated their way to California. This is before America was formed. So anyways, so I knew there was something a little bit there as well, or I was hoping there was something there prior to taking the mushrooms. So having taken them and having felt that little spirit in the room or something like that, it kind of, or the presence, whatever you want to call it, One of the things with mushrooms is words start to take on new meanings. And you sit there and speaking from a Christian viewpoint or a conservative viewpoint, somebody say something like spirits, that usually sounds bad. It's usually associated with bad things, ghosts, spirits, and they tie these things together. Having taken psilocybin mushrooms, and it kind of opens your mind, your ideas to the fact that these words don't need to be so rigid, or they're not rigid, or they shouldn't be rigid, especially something like a spirit. A spirit, in a sense, it's the only word I have to describe something like that, like a presence in the room. I don't have the ability to describe it in any other way. It's not a malevolent feeling, so I can't sit there and it wasn't an angel. I couldn't say that there was an angel in the room with me, because that's clearly a different thing. So you sit there and you run out of words. Your vocabulary is limited, and that's one thing the mushrooms really show you. And it's the struggle right now that I'm trying to deal with, and why I'm trying to tie this all back to Christianity eventually, and the conservative viewpoint is it's like language is a constraint. Language is, and it's the best, but it's the best we have, So it's like, how else are we supposed to get these ideas across? It's like you don't know what I'm talking about because you haven't felt it, so I can't really describe it, and so I've got to use words that they're just the closest things that I can use to make sense. One of my later trips, I don't want to go too far into this, but one of my later trips I saw an Aztec temple, but it wasn't an Aztec temple. It was a temple in the vein of an Aztec temple, but that's the best word I can use to describe it. That's like, those are the only words I can use to describe it, is either a Mayan or an Aztec temple, that's what it was. Now, those don't work, because if I sit there and I Google up every image of every Aztec and Mayan temple ever created, they don't look anything like that thing that I saw, but it's still the closest thing I have. So language is limiting, and I think that's why a lot of people, you listen to people like Joe Rogan, where he calls the DMT aliens. That's what he calls them, DMT aliens. And the reason why he uses the word alien, or we use the word, anybody that's taken psychedelics, the reason we use the word aliens is because it's just the damnedest closest thing we can get, and it's not even close. You can't. What do you call these things that you're running into? They're entities, but entities has kind of a weird connotation to it. Well, I mean, not that aliens doesn't, but you're running into these things that are almost indescribable. They're alive. But anyways, let's get back to the chronological order. See, this is the problem here, is your mind starts to want to go down all these tangents. Chronologically, though, so we finished my first trip. So after having taken the first trip, I was like, okay, hey, that wasn't bad. I kind of liked the effects I got. I said, I think I'd like to try more, right? I knew 1.5 grams was very low, and I knew I'd taken a low dose, and right now I'm guessing it was about 1.5. So I knew I'd taken a low dose. And I was like, okay, well, I want to do a little bit more. Let's try to get a little bit more. So girl calls up her friend and gets him to send us some more. And so, this is the time that I learned about the strains too, the different strains of mushrooms. And this is important later on. I learned about the different strains of mushrooms, and I quickly hypothesized on my own that the different strains might have different effects. So I knew there was like a golden teacher, and I knew that was like the standard one that most people had. I knew there was a penis envy, which was it never really interested me. I still haven't tried penis envy, but I knew there was Amazonians, I knew there were Mazatecs, I knew there were B pluses. I ended up asking what type we ended up getting, and we ended up getting Mazatecs for those first two times. I think the first time he said it was a mix. I think it was a mix of Golden Teachers, Mazateks, and probably B pluses if I had to guess. It was something like that. And the second time we ended up getting some Mazateks. So I think we had enough for her to take 1 gram and me to take 2.5 grams. Is about what we took, I believe. See, I think at first she ended up having like 4 small capsules, and I think she took like 2 at first and then took 2 a little bit later. So her effects, as far as I remember, one day I will have her on this, if this podcast continues, I will have her on, and she's already agreed to it, and maybe she can go into and say what she felt. But as far as I know right now, I believe her effects are very, very minimum. I remember at one point in time she was laughing. I do remember that. She did her laugh, this is her first time on mushrooms. I remember her doing her laugh. So anyways, set and setting on this second trip. I knew the first one had worked out well, so I wanted to just kind of take it up to the next level. So on the second trip, I got more candles, and I got scented candles. I ended up getting like a sea breeze candle and a redwood forest candle, and I put them kind of next to each other. So I was kind of like trying to invoke California, my home state, and I was trying to kind of invoke like the feelings I guess I got when I was up in Northern California along the coastline or something like that. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of abstracting here. I'm kind of trying to guess what really my motivation and what I was thinking at the time. That's probably what I was thinking if I had to guess. For the movie that I decided to play an Elton John concert. I think it was his 60th birthday concert, and I have it on Blu-ray, and so I thought it'd be a good idea to get some music going, because one of the first things that I wanted to feel on mushrooms, I wanted to know what synesthesia was like. I mean, that was one of the things that I wanted to know. I was like, synesthesia, like, this sounds cool. You can see sounds. Yeah, that signed me up for that. Anyways, so I got the Elton John concert playing, and it took a while for the mushrooms to kick in. I think it probably took a good, probably a good 5 or 6 songs in before it actually hit, I think. But so the mushrooms start kicking in, and I'm starting to feel the sounds. Like I'm getting into the music. The music is playing, and I'm starting to really hear it. And one of the first, I guess what the government would call an illusion, one of the first illusions or hallucinations I had was, as one of the songs was playing, I heard like a whole like verse of lyrics that I had never heard before. Like, I know Elton John's songs very, very well. Like, I listen to him a lot. Several of his songs I just have completely memorized, But at the time, I remember laying there listening to the music, and I was laying on my couch and listening to the music, and I remember there were, for some reason, words in the middle of a song that I knew all the words to that I didn't know the words to. You know what I mean? It's like the song was longer for some reason. It was like a minute longer, and in that minute were extra lyrics that I had never heard before. So, let's see. Anyways, so that was one of the first things that was interesting, and I kind of took note of. So the girlfriend's sitting on the couch, and I'm laying on the couch, and I have my head on her lap. And the girl is she starts to massage my chest. And this was a really cool feeling that I got. As she's massaging my chest, her fingers feel like they kind of like start going through my skin and into like my muscles. She didn't like pierce all the way through into my like chest cavity or anything like that, which is something she did do at a later point. At a later point, I did receive a massage from her that did feel like she was like just reaching all the way through me. But in this case, it just felt really nice, as she's kind of just, I think, yeah, I was still a police officer at the time, and I probably had a long day of work if I had to guess, and as she's massaging kind of my sore muscles and everything like that, I think that was the feeling I was getting, was just like dang, yeah, that feels good, yeah. So she's massaging me, and so this is where I closed my eyes for the first time on psilocybin, and this was pretty profound for me, or not profound. It was another hook. It was another hook to keep me to, like this call to adventure, in the archetype here. This is the call to adventure here. I close my eyes, and as the Elton John songs are playing, the sounds are coming out of his piano are like washing over, and I'm seeing them as colors. Like I'm seeing waves and bands of the sound, and it's coming from the direction of the TV, and as they're coming across as these pretty yellows, these pretty purples, and it's funny, yellow's like a color I do not like. I don't like the color yellow, but for some reason, like that color yellow was just like this neon, very, very pretty yellow, and lots of purples, maybe a few oranges, maybe a few blues in there. My predominant color that I see with my eyes closed on the mushrooms is usually blue. Blue's a pretty big one that I see. I see a lot of blues, a lot of greens too, I guess, kind of depending. So anyways, so I'm seeing these sounds wash in front of my face and everything. It's really, really nice. It was a really good version of synesthesia. It really showed kind of, and it's interesting, the description that the class and the government had given me of what synesthesia was supposed to look like was much, much different. They had no clue. That's the thing, is the government doesn't understand these things. Normal cops, especially if you're just like, if you're not in somewhere where there is psilocybin, so if you're not in Oregon, or if you're not in like Denver, Colorado, or something like that, most cops don't understand this stuff. Most cops don't understand psychedelics. They just don't. They probably don't even know what they look like, to tell you the truth. I could probably have a baggie of mushrooms, and if I got pulled over with them, to tell you the truth, I don't know if the average cop around here would actually know what they were. So that sounded really bad, and obviously I'm but anyways, so the synesthesia, the way that they described it in the class, is they described it as basically a person would be listening to music, and they would kind of see like notes floating around, like like the cartoon version. Like you sit there, like when you watch a Bugs Bunny cartoon, and they get hit over the head, and these little notes kind of like are circling over their head or something like that. That's kind of how they described it as seeing. Like you see something, I guess, that's not there, doesn't exist or whatever, which, I mean, using those descriptions, I guess, psychedelics do that. But in this case, the way they described it was not correct, and the way that I experienced it was much, much better than what I had anticipated it was going to be like. So we watched through the concert, and once again I had my pee point, where I had to get up and go pee. And when I did that, we decided to turn off the concert and go lay down. Now, this was interesting. We decided to go lay down, and as I entered into my bedroom, I have a blanket, and it's like my trip blanket now, which is, oh my god, it's amazing. We'll get further into it. This blanket is like a staple of like probably 75% of my trips. But anyways, on this trip, this is the first time I had seen that blanket while tripping, and I looked at it, and there's a picture of a tiger on it. It's basically, it's one of those fuzzy decorative blankets, and it has a picture of a tiger on it, and the tiger winked at me. That's the only way I can describe it. The tiger's eye just winked for some reason. This was the one where I kind of looked at it. Made me stop, pause, and I had to tell my girlfriend, I'm like, that tiger just winked at me. It's like the eye opened and closed and the tiger winked at me. This was like, it's profound now. I don't think at the time it was more so just kind of interesting. It was kind of cool. But right now, thinking back on it, it was really, really profound. You know, it was another one of those first starting experiences that becomes typical later on. But at the time, it was kind of like an eye opener. Like, whoa, you know, the tiger winked at me. So, God, man, the hard thing about all this stuff is you sit there and you describe it. And to me, it sounds, you know, I understand what I'm saying, and somebody else that has tripped before probably also understands what I'm saying. But to the person that's never tripped, I mean, this probably sounds crazy, you know. I mean, you see an image on a blanket move that didn't move, you know, and it's hard to describe. It's hard to get across these things and try to get people to understand that haven't taken psychedelics, you know, what's actually going on here. So, I mean, it seems, you know, and you sit there and you say it's real, or at least it seems real, or as real as anything could be. The fact that this, you know, tiger winked at me. But I mean, I'm sure if there was a security camera in my bedroom and it was looking at the what had happened, obviously it wouldn't record the tiger winking. So this is one of those things where you have to kind of reconcile the two. What's real, you know? It kind of like makes you gotta reevaluate, you know. Anyways, let's move on here. So I think me and my girlfriend had sex at that time. And this was one of the only times we've ever had sex while tripping. Usually we don't do it. Usually I'm tripping too hard. Usually I'm on like 5 grams or something like that. And so obviously sex is impossible. And so this is one of the... And not that you... That's one thing, like while you're on mushrooms, you know, you don't really feel any sexual desires, I guess. I mean, there's been some times where I've definitely seen some very sensual type stuff, but I've never felt I guess horny. I don't know, horny while you're tripping. That's just not something. It's just something that doesn't happen. So I think we were just having sex, really, like just in a normal type fashion there. Sounds kind of bad. Sorry, baby. I love you. Anyways. So we were having sex, and I remember as we're having sex, my hands were kind of rubbing like up and down her waist and her thigh and grabbing her butt and everything like that. And as I'm doing that, I remember one of the things was her body was kind of changing density, I guess is the best way to describe it. She would feel soft at one moment and kind of fluffy, and then she would feel a little more smooth and hard another moment, you know. And so it just kind of went back and forth a little. All good feelings, but definitely a change in feeling. So it was nothing extreme. Eventually we stopped having sex and we just laid down, and I think this is where I have my first like vision kind of. So she lays down and she's got her head elevated up on the pillow, and I've got my head on her stomach. So I'm kind of laying a little bit sideways, a little bit down lower than her, and my head's on my stomach. My head is facing downwards, down towards our feet. And I'm just kind of holding on to her. And this is where I close my eyes. And things start to take shape, you know. It's not like when you see just the colors. There's many times when I trip and I just see the colors, and they're dancing around and doing all sorts of stuff. And there's other times where you see things that are more tangible, or things that appear to be more tangible, I guess. Although I wouldn't necessarily say they're as real looking as the colors. Sometimes the colors are so vibrant and vivid that they're more real than the visions that you have. So anyway, so in this vision, I see my dog, and the dog, and the dog's with me, and we are standing in front of a building, which the best way I could describe it would be similar in architect to the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disneyland. So it's kind of that New Orleans style building is what it looks like. Now it's not actually the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, that's for sure. But it's the archetype, or the architect is similar in design. So I go inside the building, my dog's with me, and I see the river. This is also part of why I tie it back to the Pirates of the Caribbean, is because there's basically a river that's flowing out the building. And so this is kind of funny. My dog hates water in real life, but in this vision, the dog kind of just got in the river and then turned into the river. It's hard to describe. These are one of those things that you can't even say how it happened, because it's not like in the vision he didn't jump into the river. He just became the river. And see, this is one of those things where it's like you can't really, words aren't good enough to describe what happened. You know, a series of events as you're trying to like tie them together to tell a story here. The trip is almost impossible to do on that. So anyways, the dog turned into the river, and he starts, he gets real, he's like happy, like I see him like smiling kind of and relaxing in the river, and he just kind of goes with the flow. And so the river flows, and here's an example of distance being distorted. I'm holding on to, even though I'm holding on to my girlfriend, even though my head's on her stomach, the river flows into her. It flows into her, and I can see all of her too. I can see her head to her toes, but at the same time, my perception of where my head is in relationship to her body, it didn't make sense. And even the feeling too, I'm holding on to her, and certain pieces of her are not where they should be. My eyes are closed, and I'm sure if I would have opened them, I could have kind of reconnected where she was at. But just in feeling it, she kind of felt like she wasn't where she was at. So the river flowed into her, and then she turns into, this is kind of the cool part, and this is kind of why she's my conduit for a lot of my trips. She's basically she's like a conduit, basically. She really helps my trips kind of navigate in certain directions. So she turns into a bunch of like scenic naturescapes is what happens. The river kind of starts to flow, and as it flows in front of her, it flows into her first, and then it flows in front of her, and then she becomes like this open grass meadow, like really nice, really pretty, good colors and everything like that. And all these naturescapes are very Disney-esque. That's the best word I can use, and maybe that ties back to the Pirates of the Caribbean thing, but they're very idealized versions of these scenes, not realistic at all. So it's this meadow, and then the river flows, and then my girlfriend, she turns into a forest with like a creek that runs into the river. So the creek is running forward through her. She's the forest, and then it runs into the river, and the river continues to flow forward. So then then my girlfriend turns into like a mangrove forest. It's like the river like had flown into the ocean, into the mangrove forest, into the ocean. And so now I'm looking at her, and this was probably the most vivid one, and probably the best looking one. As she's this mangrove forest, I can see underneath her where the roots go down into the ocean and down into this white sand. really like tropical looking type stuff, and I can see like little fishes like swimming around and stuff like that. And I can also see above her, I can see the sky as well. And so she's like these trees. She's the whole scape as well at the same time. Very, very pretty. That was a good one. And then probably the last one that I remembered was she turned into kind of a mountain. It's kind of like a Hawaiian mountain, like volcanic looking type mountain on the edge of the ocean. So that's why I say it's Hawaiian. So she's looking like this volcanic mountain right there, and the ocean's kind of where her feet are at. So I think that was the last thing I saw. Yeah, okay. So this is what happened. This is why I say she's a conduit as well. So at that point in time, and this is kind of the end of the trip though, I actually decided to roll away from her. I was starting to feel kind of stiff on my side, and so I decided to kind of roll over to my other side. And as I rolled over to my other side, like the visions like completely almost stopped completely. Like there was almost nothing left in my eyes. As like I almost saw like just what you would normally see if you were sober and you close your eyes. And so when that happened, I realized, okay, whoa, she was kind of what I needed in order to see the things I was seeing. So I did flip back over immediately once I had that realization. And then but when I flipped back over and I tried to grab back onto her, I don't think I had any major visions after that again. I think I did remain a little high, but I was clearly on the way down. This is also interesting. I did realize on these two trips that the mushrooms do come through you in waves. Like you do have kind of like a run up, and then a little bit drop, and then a little bit, then you run up a little bit more, and then you drop, and then you come up to a peak, and then you come back down, and then it's kind of like there's these waves of the psilocybin that come through you. And that was the first time I realized that was a thing. Once again, my knowledge so far on the mushrooms had been very shallow. I mean, I knew a little bit. I knew enough to determine, or at least I believe, that they were completely safe. And yeah, so that was about the limit of my knowledge. I knew that set and setting were important. I had heard things like the fact that there are no bad trips, and there are only challenging trips. I think I had heard that, but once again, I didn't even know what that meant at the time. Later on, I had like some really, really challenging trips, and but they were never bad. I've never had a bad trip. I've had challenging trips. So that's interesting too, and just everything I was able to find on them, just led me to believe that this is, I don't know, relatively safe to try, and then so having done this, this kind of just, tying this back to the archetype. This is the beginning of it. This is the beginning of the journey. So I saw the world differently than it was, and I didn't experience no ego death. I'm going to be honest, I don't think I ever have experienced an ego death. And I've been gone, absolutely gone on mushrooms. Like, I mean, literally DMT realm type stuff for, the mushrooms last 4 hours. And so I've spent at least an hour or two in the DMT realm, or what would be considered similar to the DMT realm, but on mushrooms. So I've been that far gone, but at the same time, I've never had my ego death. My ego has always kind of remained intact. And I don't know if that's an integration thing or a Christian idea, which was a theory of mine today, actually, as I was kind of thinking about recording this podcast. I was thinking about how maybe if you're integrated right, and you understand things like the shamanic rituals and where Christianity, like if you understand its core principles and stuff, I guess you wouldn't lose sight of yourself. That's something we'll have to explore much further on, as we continue along these podcasts and everything. I guess this is going a little bit longer than I wanted to. I did put the first episode up on YouTube. I'm going to put the second episode up on YouTube. So if you guys made it to the end here, I'd really appreciate a like, a comment, or a subscribe, or something like that. Anything to help out the algorithm or whatnot. Mostly, actually, I am making this podcast just for myself, but I do think it's an interesting enough, or a unique enough viewpoint that it might help other people. Because I'm having a big problem with the whole Christianity psychedelic thing. I've been watching a lot of Christians talk about their come to Jesus moments, and they used to do psychedelics, and then they had their come to Jesus moment. I haven't been able to find anybody that's in my position where they're a fundamentalist Christian, or and then politically a staunch conservative, or a fundamentalist conservative, and then take psilocybin and still remain, not go off on the hippy dippy end. And I guess I've definitely opened up a lot, but I still consider myself, to be a fundamentalist Christian. And so the thing is, and part of these podcasts is we need to integrate these mushrooms into our Christian viewpoint in an appropriate way. Obviously, you can't just shove something into the Bible that's not in the Bible. So these things, the dreams that I have, or not the dream, I'm sorry, the visions that I've had and the places I've gone on psilocybin, for me, a lot of them are Christian. The majority of the things I see are Christian in nature, and so I think everything fits. But I need to explore that further and deeper. So that's a goal of the podcast eventually. First, we got to get through the archetypical story to lay down that foundation of where we're at. So, anyways, yeah, that's my first and second trip. Next time, I don't necessarily remember my third, fourth, those two trips probably. I'm not really sure if it was I remember one of these trips well, but I'm not for sure which one it was exactly, so I will go over the next one there. And that was a very profound awakening one as well. So, all right. Thanks everybody. Thanks for everybody for watching or listening.